Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mia and this is Creepy Time. I want to start out my video by saying that none of the research is mine. I don't claim any rights to it, and anything that I pull a lot of information from, I will go ahead and link down below. So that way if you guys want to do some more research on your own, you can go ahead and click the link and discover more on the topic. I also want to throw out a content warning, especially for this video. If you are sensitive to any topics of violence, sexual abuse, this is not the video for you. It is very, very heavy with just violence in general, sexual violence, and it's just awful. Okay, this video is so awful that I decided to break out some calming kinetic sand so that I can go ahead and do something with myself while I'm talking about it. So let's just dive right in. Today we are going to be talking about the infamous Jeffrey friggin' Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is who we are going to be talking about today, and he is the epitome of creepy. He is the epitome of sick and twisted and disgusting, and I know that he is, I don't even really want to call him pop culture, but he's like one of those people that you think about when you think about a serial killer. And I know that there's a lot of info out there on him and about him, and that he's frequently talked about, but I figured, for those of you who do not really know who he is, go ahead and buckle up, because it's a long and wild ride. As always, I have my little cheat sheet here, and all right, let's just get into it. Enough of the bloviating. So Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st in 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he was born in the evangelical Deaconess Hospital, whatever, I don't know, some hospital that's tied to a church. He was born to parents Joyce Annette and Lionel Herbert Dahmer, and he was among the first two sons born to them. His mom worked as a teletype machine instructor, and his father was a chemistry student. He was a full-time student, and he wanted to major in chemistry. So he was a student at Marquette University. I guess that's somewhere near Milwaukee. It is said that his childhood was kind of lonely. He wasn't really given a whole lot of attention. He was, I guess, I don't want to say neglected by his parents, but in the emotional and developmental category, he was he was provided for. He didn't starve or anything, but there wasn't any affection and love that a normal typical parent gives a child. So his mother was known to be really anxious, really tense, really greedy for both attention and pity. So she wanted to be pitied and looked after. And she was also really argumentative about everything, or she was said to be, especially with anyone who really didn't give her that attention that she was seeking, and as well as his father, because he would come home after a long day and he wouldn't give her every second of attention that he had, so she would get really upset, and the neighbors would hear them arguing, yada yada yada. So she spent most of her time in bed. They said she was recovering from, the heck was it? It was something like hysteria or some, one of those illnesses that we don't really talk about anymore because we actually know what the actual illness is. But she was in bed a lot, and she, like I said, demanded constant attention from her husband. And she, I guess, everything got to her, and she attempted suicide one night. I guess she was addicted to I don't know what kind of pills these are. They're called Equinol pills. I'm assuming they're sleeping pills. But she tried to overdose on them one night, and so his parents were constantly arguing with each other, and he himself noted that his upbringing was full of extreme tension. So while he was sometimes described as like happy and energetic, he became notably subdued after a surgery that he had had. He had, like, I guess, a double hernia, which can be, I don't want to say common in children because the majority of children don't have them, but it is something that you see in children. And around the age of 4, he had a surgery to repair this double hernia, and afterwards he was like notably subdued and just not really energetic and playful anymore. So when he was in elementary school, he was kind of like the quiet, shy kid, didn't really go out of his way to make friends or anything like that. And he was a quiet, shy kid to the point where his first grade teacher noted, so like I guess on their report cards, there's a space for notes that you can leave for the parents, and she noted in there that he appeared neglected. So that tells you something like, God, the teacher is catching on to that. So it is English suspected that he was that way due to his mother's illnesses. So basically, she is a wreck, and that again, let me just throw this out there. This is not to downplay any kind of mental illnesses. I'm not passing judgment on them, for I have several myself. So I'm just gonna nip that in the bud right there. She was a wreck, and she wasn't taking care of what she needed to take care of for one reason or another. And so the teacher noticed it. Dahmer had a couple of friends, though, despite his reserved kind of nature. He still managed to make a couple of friends. And from a young age, however, he was having creepy behavior that you don't typically see in a young kid, or if you do see it in a young kid, it's like a red flag. It's like ding 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 ding, let's take a closer look in here at what's going on in your life. But no one did that for him, obviously. So from a young age, he had this innate interest in dead animals. So he never, at least it's not reported that he killed animals, right? But he had a fascination with dead animals. So he would collect large dead insects in jars, and he would pick up animal carcasses off the side of the road, and he would dismember these animals at home. So he'd bring them home to his garage and just take them apart. So he would then dispose of he would dismember them and then dispose of them outside his house, in the back of the woods. And he would store parts of these animals that he found interesting in jars, and he would keep them in the shed. I guess they had a shed out back of their house. Typical American family. So he would just store jars and jars of this stuff in that shed out back. And it was said that he had an interest in how these animals fit together. So that's why he would dismember them, was because he wanted, I guess they were just Legos to him. How do they connect? Where do they fit? So that's why he would do it. And there was one instance where he decapitated the carcass of a dog, and he nailed, okay, again, trigger warning here. So he decapitated the carcass of a dog, and he nailed the body of the dog to a tree. And then he took the skull or the head of this dog and impaled it on a stake, and he stuck it in the ground near a wooden cross. And this was in the woods out back by his house, because the way it's being described, I'm picturing it's their house and they got a shed and may or may not have a fence, and then there's just wilderness. So, okay. I guess this fascination may have started at age 4 because it's reported that his dad was cleaning out like the underside of their house, and there was like an animal carcass discovered there, and when he pulled it out, there was like bones, and apparently like when he pulled the bones out, like they made a noise, as bones do, I suppose, and Dahmer was like thrilled. He was like thrilled about the noise that they made, and he wanted to like touch them and play with them, and you know, that's what's reported anyway. So I guess it started from like an early age. So he would even go so far as to feel live animals and just like feel them to like see where their bones are and how they like connect together and stuff. So weird. All right. He and his family moved to Doylestown, Ohio in October of 1966, and his mom was pregnant with his baby brother at that time. So he was, you know, one of 2 children. He was the firstborn, obviously. So his little brother was born on December 18th of 1966, and Dahmer got to name him, and he named him David. So his dad graduated with his chemistry degree and became employed in Akron, Ohio. And then in 1968, they relocated again to Bath, Ohio. And I guess there was a time during a family dinner that they were eating chicken, and Dahmer asked his dad what would happen if the bones were placed in a bleach solution. And rather than like the dad getting, you know, upset that he would ask that question, he was actually like thrilled about it because, you know, Dahmer is like super like reserved and like doesn't have an interest. He's like apathetic and like doesn't really want to do anything. And so for him to like show an interest in something, he was like super excited about it. So his dad went, you know, being a chemistry major, turned around and he showed him how to he showed him what would happen like if you put the bones in bleach, but then he went even further, and that was too much fun. He went even further, and then he like showed him how to like preserve bones and stuff. So hindsight is 20/20, right? So he continued to avidly collect the bones and dead things at that point. So during his teenage years, he was considered an outcast and barely had any friends. And he would smuggle booze into school in like his army jacket like pockets, and then he would store the booze in his locker, and he was drinking like all the time, like all the time. I guess a student asked him one day why he was drinking gin in class. Like, why are you drinking gin in homeroom, bud? And his response to that was, it's my medicine, or it's my medication. So he was an average student, you know, even with everything that was going on. Like, his peers didn't really notice him as like a friend, but his teachers and the staff at the school said that he was really intelligent, and he was really polite, so he had that going for him. And he was, average. He really liked tennis and band. So during high school, Dahmer reached puberty, as one does, and he discovered that he was gay. So he, ironed that out real quick. So he discovered that he's gay, and he didn't, he ended up having, a brief relationship, but he didn't tell his parents, at all. He didn't want his parents to know. So he had a brief relationship in high school, and it's reported that, there was no intercourse involved. It was just a, fling. However, he later admitted that he was fantasizing about a dominating and controlling relationship where his partner was completely submissive and male, and these fantasies somehow became intertwined with his dissection. I don't know. They just did. So he also had a fantasy, or wasn't a fantasy. Well, it started out as one, but this was something that he actually acted out. So based upon his fantasies, he decided that one day when he was 16 that he was going to, trigger warning, sorry, I'm going to be doing this a lot just in case you want to change your mind halfway through this. So he said that he wanted to rape an unconscious jogger, and he just found him attractive. He had no clue who this guy was. He just was like, that's cute. I want to knock him out and rape him. So what he did was he literally hid behind a bush with a baseball bat. And he waited for this jogger to run by. And the gods were merciful that day because that jogger didn't run by. And he was like pissed about it because he wanted this to happen. But the jogger didn't run by that day. But that was his first planned attack. So in 1978, Dahmer moved out of the house on his own because his parents were divorcing and it was a mess. It was super hostile. He didn't want to be there. So he moved out. I don't know where he went. It didn't say. So he moved out, and then he graduated high school in 1978, which was also the same year that he ended up committing his first murder. So 3 weeks after graduation, to be specific. So at the time, Dahmer was living alone in the family home because like the dad and the little brother were somewhere, and then the mom was who knows. So he was alone in his family home. So he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was almost 19, and he told Hicks that they would drink together for a while and just hang out. I guess he was, hitchhiking to a rock concert. Rock music will be the death of you. Satan's music. Don't listen to it. So the poor guy, he was on his way to a rock concert. Just kidding, by the way. And Dahmer was like, hey, you want to come and drink and hang out? And he was like, sure, I guess. So they hung out and they drank for like several hours. And then the kid was like, yeah, you know what? It's time to go. I want to leave. But Dahmer didn't want him to. So the logical solution to this for Dahmer was to go ahead and take a dumbbell and strike this poor kid in the back of the head. He snuck up behind him and strike him in the back of the head twice with the dumbbell. So obviously he fell unconscious, and Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell. And he proceeded to strip the body of the clothes, and he proceeded to masturbate as he stood over the body. Lovely. So once he was done, the next day, Dahmer dissected Hicks' body in the basement and buried the remains in a shallow grave in the backyard. What the fuck? Sorry. I'm not monetized by any means, so WTF. It gets better. Or worse. Actually worse. It gets a lot worse. So he decides to unearth the body and dissolve it in acid. Yeah. He dissolved the body in acid. So then the remaining bones were crushed and pulverized and scattered in the woods. And what he did with the liquefied body was he flushed it down the toilet. Yay! So he continued, he like enrolled in like college, but he just wasn't with it. He wasn't there after that. I don't know how you can like do anything after that. So he tries to enroll in college, and his alcohol abuse is just like raging. It's out of control. So he drops out of college. He like fails it. Like his first semester, he got like a 0.47 out of 4.0 GPA, and that's not going to get you very far. So he dropped out, and he decided, I guess, that the army was for him. And he went to the army, and he was actually like a decent soldier. It was reported that he was a decent soldier, and not surprisingly, he was really interested in being a medic, so he was a medic as a soldier. And so when he was in the army, it's reported that he raped 2 of his fellow soldiers. and his alcohol abuse was like crazy out of control. So the army decided like, yep, it's time for you to go. And they discharged him, and they gave him an honorable discharge because they felt that the problems that he was having wouldn't affect his civilian life. So, discharged from the army, and he had to go to a debriefing. I'm not really quite sure what that means, but he had to go to debriefing in South Dakota. So then part of that was, here's a free plane ticket to anywhere in the country. So he ended up going to Miami, Florida, and he worked in like a delicatessen and rented out a motel room. He was evicted for non-payment, and he was like homeless for a little bit, and then he called his dad, and he was like, Dad, please take me back, and he did. So he returned to Ohio, and his drinking was so bad that he received a drunken disorderly conduct and was arrested. 10 days in jail and like a $60 fine, and his father was like trying to wean him off of alcohol, but it wasn't working, so he sent him to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. So she was the only one that really ever displayed any kind of like affection towards him, so everything went swimmingly at first until it didn't. But he was like, going to church with her and doing his chores. I mean, he was still drinking and smoking, but, he was at least applying himself to something, right? He gained employment as a phlebotomist at Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center. So he worked there for 10 months, and he was actually laid off. I guess he can't catch a break. So he's like, even with my efforts that I'm putting in, I'm still either fired or laid off. So he was laid off from that, and he was unemployed for like 2 years. But side note on that one. Just before he was canned from the phlebotomy gig, he was arrested again for indecent exposure, and he showed his giblets, okay, to a freaking crowd of 25 women and children. So he gets arrested for that, whatever charges fell from that. And he gets another job in 1985 where he was at a chocolate factory working from like 11, he was the night shift. So he was working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And the only reason I say that is because it's kind of important. So I guess one night he was out on break and he was reading a book, and he gets this note from like a rando, and it was offering him fellatio, and Dahmer didn't take him up on that, but it got the little old gears spinning, because he was like, there's a lot of gay people out at this hour, and I'm gay, and I'm also sick in the head. So it got the wheels spinning. So he began to become familiar with the gay clubs in Milwaukee, like the bathhouses and so forth. So he, another side note, I guess, at this point in time, he freaking stole a male mannequin from like a department store, and he was using it basically as like a sex doll. I don't know how he worked that out, but he did. And his grandma found it, and she was horrified. She was like, get this out of my house, like right now. So he was kind of bummed about that. And he became super comfortable with the clubs and the bathhouses, and he was like having, frequent sex with multiple different partners, and he was getting frustrated with them because they had the audacity to move while having sex. He didn't want that. So he said that he trained, this is a quote, he trained himself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of as people. So this was not a person that he was having, intercourse with. It was like just solely for his pleasure, right? So that is when he decided it was a good idea, like this is what's going to solve my problem. They're moving, so let's make them not move. So he started slipping sleeping pills into his prospective partner's drinks at these bathhouses and clubs. And they would become unconscious, and he would have his way with them. So he decided that he would just continue doing this at a motel, because he he got kicked out. They didn't want him there anymore. Obviously, you're a freaking public health hazard. So they kicked him out, and he decided doing these acts at a hotel. And I guess he was frustrated by this because he noticed an 18-year-old male had died, and he decided that, well, you know, if I can't have them stay still for me yet, I know what I'll do. So he decided that he was going to try and steal the corpse of this 18-year-old male that had died. And he went out to the frickin' cemetery and tried to dig up the casket because he wanted to take the body home. And he started digging up the grave, but it wasn't working because the earth is packed in, you know? And he got frustrated and left. And I don't know what the heck is going on. I'm like reading through all this stuff and I'm like dumbfounded already, and it just keeps getting worse. So, all right, in 1986, he was arrested again. For masturbating in front of two 12-year-old boys. So you would think like the police would get a clue at this point. Like, this person has been arrested about, 6 times by now. We might want to keep him in there for a little while, but who am I to know? So in 1987, he accidentally murdered this poor man. His name was Stephen Tumoy, and he was a 25-year-old man that he had met at the bar. So it was a typical song and dance. He ended up drugging him back at the hotel, and he stated that's all he wanted to do, but then he woke up the next morning to Tumoy beneath him, and his chest was caved in, and he was bruised and like bloody, and Dahmer's arm was bruised and like swollen, and he claims that he has no memory of killing him. So to dispose of this body, he purchased a large suitcase and placed him inside. And then he brought this suitcase to his grandmother's house. And 1 week later, I guess this body was in this suitcase for a week, and 1 week later, he severed the head, the arms, the legs from the torso, and he fillets the body from the bones, and he cut the flesh into small pieces and placed the flesh into garbage bags, and then he crushed up the bones and like scattered them like he did before. So he states that the entire process took him 2 hours, and he disposed of everything except for Tumoy's head, which he kept wrapped in a blanket. And after 2 weeks, he decided to boil the head in a mixture of industrial detergent and bleach. Thanks, Dad. And bleach in an effort to retain the skull, which was then used for masturbation. So eventually, the skull was too brittle, so he pulverized it and disposed of it. After Tumoy, he actively sought out victims, and he would drug, rape, and strangle them. He repeated the process of Tumoy on a 14-year-old Native American prostitute named James Duxtator, and he lured him back to his grandmother's house with the promise of $50 for sex. All right, this is where it gets crazy. So on March 24th, 1988, a 22-year-old bisexual man by the name of Richard Guerrero, he lured him into his grandmother's residence, again for $50 to spend the night. And he drugged him, and he strangled him with a leather strap, and he performed oral sex on the corpse. Great. He dismembered after 24 hours. Like, he left the body there for 24 hours, and then he decided to dismember them. He kept the head and just went on with his day. On April 23rd, 1988, he lured another man to Grandma's house, drugged this man, and right when all the action was going to happen, Jeffrey Dahmer heard his grandma say, "Jeff, like, is that you?" Like, she called out to him, and Jeff said, "Yes," like, just to kind of make it seem like he was alone. And then his grandma, like, knew that he wasn't alone, and he knew that she knew that he wasn't alone, so he ended up not killing him. He just waited for him to pass out, and he kindly took him to the hospital. Probably the only gracious thing this man has ever done. So in September of 1988, his grandma asked him to leave. There was too many men that he was bringing home. There was bad smells coming from the basement and from the garage. So he found an apartment on North 25th Street, and in September 25th, he moved in. And he was arrested again for fondling a 13-year-old boy. Great. So he lost his job. He was convicted of second-degree sexual assault, and he couldn't pay rent, so he asked his grandma if he could move back in with her. She said yes. So in March of 1989, Sears wasn't, Anthony Sears was minding his own business, and Dahmer lured him in, as he does, and he states that he wasn't looking to commit a crime. I guess they started talking. Grandma came home at some point. They had sex. He drugged him, and he strangled him. And the following morning, he placed the corpse in his grandmother's bathtub and proceeded to decapitate the corpse. He attempted to fillet it and stripped it of the flesh. He pulverized the bones. He scattered the bones, put the flesh in the trash. And he said that this man was exceptionally attractive. So he decided to preserve the head, or the skull rather, and the genitalia. And he preserved the genitalia in acetone and stored it in his work locker, which dumbfounds me. I don't know how you can store something that heinous in your work locker, and how did nobody see it or find out or anything. Whatever. He stored it in the work locker. So he, 1 year later, he moved back into his apartment, and he took the remains with him. And he moved into the infamous, North 25th Street apartment 213 that everyone knows him by. So, you guys, he just is ruthless, okay? He doesn't even take a break. 1 week later, he kills Raymond Smith. He lured him to his apartment for $50 for the promise of sex, and he said that he drugged him, manually strangled him this time, and the following day purchased a Polaroid camera. And he took several Polaroid pictures. He had posed the man was deceased, and he posed his body in different sexual ways, and decided that he was just going to take pictures of that. So he took several pictures and dismembered him in the bathroom, per usual. There's a repeating theme here, okay? So unless there's something that really sticks out, he freaking dismembered him in the bathroom. He boiled the arms and the legs and the pelvis in a large steel kettle. And he boiled it with a detergent, which allowed them to rinse, he wanted to rinse the bones in the sink. He didn't want any flesh left on it. So he dissolved the remainder of the skeleton, excluding the skull, in a large container with hydrochloric acid. The skull, once it was preserved, he spray painted it with, he painted it with something, spray painted skull, and he placed it near the skull of Anthony Sears, which he had brought over and killed earlier, so they were buddies there. Apparently he had a black towel on like a metal filing cabinet. He had them together and freaking closed it. So 1 week later, he tried to take another victim, but he was brilliant and drank the same drink as the victim, so drugged himself too, and he actually woke up robbed. This person had taken some clothes, about $300, a watch, and he never reported it because what is he going to report? They're like, oh yeah, the cops are like, can we take a look around? Nice skull and genital collection you have here. So he didn't report it, although I guess he like told his PO that he was robbed, but like nothing happened, you know? Like the PO's like, I got bigger problems. So in June of 1990, he lured Edward Smith. Same song and dance, $50 for sex, $50 to pose for pictures, whatever the heck he felt like saying that day. And he drugged and strangled Edward Smith, decided to place him in a freezer for several months, hoping that, you know, it would get rid of the moisture, right? So it didn't. And freezing did not remove the moisture. And I don't know, he kept it and like acidified the body like months later. But he accidentally like destroyed the skull while he was like baking it. He like destroyed it and it exploded, and he was really bummed about that. He wasn't able to retain anything. So 3 months later, after Smith, he lured Ernest Miller, a 22-year-old male, with the promise of $50. Apparently that's the going rate for everybody. $50 to perform some sort of sexual act or pose for pictures. So the poor thing was 22 years old. He also agreed to let Dahmer listen to his heart and stomach. And Dahmer, like, they were doing their thing, and he went to, like, give this man a blowjob, and he turned around to him, like, playfully. He was like, that'll cost you extra. And so that led to Dahmer going ahead and drugging him. But he only had like 2 pills, right? Like usually he put like 7 pills in the drink, but he only had 2 this time. So he decided that he was going to slash the carotid with the same knife that he used to dissect victims. The poor guy bled out in minutes. He posed the body, took pictures, put him in the bathtub and dismembered him. Dahmer repeatedly kissed and talked to the severed head while dismembering the rest of the body. And then he wrapped the heart and the biceps and the flesh from the legs and like packaged it and then placed it in his fridge for later consumption. He then boiled the remaining flesh and organs into like a jelly-like substance using that detergent, and then he rinsed the bones. And the bones, he placed the bones in bleach solution for 24 hours, and then he placed them on like a towel to dry for a week. He put the head in the fridge, and then he like painted the skull with enamel. So in September 1924, September 24th,